With the WINN FM News, I am Kevin Brown.
And I am Yulana Weeks.
Our top stories.
Kim Collins Athletics Stadium rehabilitation project on road to completion.
OECS Energy Ministers tour ECCB's solar canopy project, aim for regional renewable energy transformation. Transparency International highlights corruption in Guyana. Jamaica slips in global corruption ranking amid rising concerns. Internationally, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. confirmed as U.S. President Trump's health secretary by Senate. Now, the details.
The rehabilitation of the Kim Collins Athletics Stadium in Bird Rock, St. Kitts is underway, managed by the Public Works Department for the Ministry of Sports. The redevelopment includes a brand new synthetic track and stadium rehabilitation to address the wear and tear concerns there. During the sports season of 2024, events that would usually be held at the Kim Collins Athletics Stadium were forced to be held at temporary locations across the Federation. In particular, the Ministries of Sports in St. Kitts and Sister Island Nevis successfully negotiated to allow for training and competitions at the Nevis Athletics Stadium so that events could be held and, more importantly, national athletes could achieve qualifying times at home for both the Olympic Games and Carifta. Speaking about the project, Minister responsible for infrastructure, Conris Maynard, said the renovations, quote, represents a significant investment in the future of sports in our federation. I look forward to seeing how these improvements will elevate athletics, inspire our athletes, and enhance the overall sporting experience in St. Kitts and Nevis, unquote. On November 29, 2024, the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Sports, Valencia Sider, confirmed the work being undertaken at the stadium, thus anticipating a completion time of the end of February 2025. She said land work in the spot where the track would be placed had already begun, whilst the paving and the laying of asphalt was set to begin a week later. The arrival date for the track itself was December 11, 2024, with the installation scheduled for mid-January 2025. Callers to radio programs, some commenters on social media, and sports enthusiasts in recent years expressed concerns that the stadium, which bears the name of the Federation's most successful track and field athlete, had fallen into disrepair. There were several demands for the facility to be repaired. Ms. Sider, speaking at the November 29, 2024 press conference, said she understood the anxiety and assured the public that the facility has been a priority for the Ministry of Sports.
I understand the frustration and the anxiety as it relates to the stadium, but we have the same anxiety and we have the same frustration, but we also support our athletes. We support the athletes across all disciplines, and it wasn't that we were just sitting on our hands and not doing nothing for the stadium. There was lots of work being done in the background, a lot of preparatory work, because it's not a simple, putting on the track is not a simple thing. It takes lots of planning. There were a lot of unforeseen things that popped up, so we had to make sure all the preparatory work was done properly before we begin with the major work. So everything is on track and the athletes will have back their home in short order.
After the renovation, the Kim Collins Athletics Stadium will be repositioned as a venue for St. Kitts to host regional meets again.
The International Monetary Fund is keeping a close watch on the ongoing global trade tensions and their potential economic impact. Since U.S. President Donald Trump announced tariffs on close allies, including Mexico and Canada as well as China, concerns have risen about possible inflationary pressures and supply chain disruptions. Now, Trump has hinted at extending tariffs to the United Kingdom and the European Union, raising further concerns about global trade stability. During a recent press conference in Washington, D.C., IMF's Communications Director Judy Kozak emphasized that the fund is actively monitoring the situation and hopes for a constructive resolution.
So what I can say on this issue is we're obviously following the announcements by the U.S. with respect to tariffs on Chinese goods and potentially Canadian and Mexican goods. We're following these announcements. We believe that it's in the interest of all to find a constructive way forward to resolve this issue.
President Trump signed an executive order imposing a 25% tariff on imports from Canada and a 10% tariff on Canadian energy supplies. China faces a 10% tariff, while Mexico will be subjected to a 25% tariff. In response, Affected countries have announced their own retaliatory measures. However, Trump has temporarily paused the tariffs, a move that was quickly mirrored by Canada and Mexico.
With respect to the assessment, assessing the full impact of these measures of tariffs, it's actually going to depend on several factors, and let me lay those out. The first is, one of those factors is going to be the responses of the countries concerned. Another factor will be how firms and consumers react. And finally, it will, how the measures evolve over time will also have an impact. So at this stage, we will, of course, have more information over time and in due course as the situation evolves.
Small island nations, particularly in the Caribbean, are closely monitoring these developments. Many of these countries rely heavily on imports from the United States. Essentially, an import tax could lead to higher prices for food and other essential goods across the region. Accountant Schneidman Warner, speaking recently on WINN FM's Inside the News, discussed the potential impact of tariffs on residents of St. Kitts and Nevis.
A tariff is a tax imposed by a country on the movement of goods in or out of the country, so that when you import something from another country, let's say import something from Barbados or import something from United Kingdom, when it arrives in the country, the price of the item is $100. The importing country imposes a tariff. In St. Kitts and Nevis and most of the world, we call it duty, customs duty. And that tax which they imposed on the goods coming in is called a tariff. You also have tariffs going the other way. Sometimes for other reasons, a country would say, when you export certain goods, you have to pay a tariff. And one of the reasons for doing this is, let's say, to discourage you exporting things and that you would rather keep in the country. So it's a way to discourage people.
While the tariffs are currently on hold, regional leaders are paying close attention and are expected to address the issue at the upcoming CARICOM Heads of Government meeting in Bridgetown, Barbados.
Propose tarifications that they're hyperboles, because if indeed the United States were to introduce tariffs in any significant way on a broad variety of goods, clearly it will impact significantly in growth and development within the Caribbean region.
Antigua and Barbados Prime Minister Gaston Brown. Meanwhile, in a Truth social media post on Thursday morning, Trump wrote, quote, "Today is the big one, reciprocal tariffs," end quote. Professor and Money Matters host Dr. Terence Martin recently provided insights to WINN FM, explaining that the tourism, manufacturing and agriculture sectors in the Caribbean could all feel the effects of these trade measures.
If we are to look at inflation specifically, inflation has been trending downward, and it would also be downward in St. Kitts and Nevis because our currency is pegged to the US dollar. I know it doesn't feel like that when you go to the grocery store, but if we were to focus or adhere and anchor on what the reports out of ECCB, inflation has been trending down. We expect increased import costs from U.S. distributors who would likely raise prices of goods in the Federation, particularly consumer electronics, appliances, vehicles, construction materials. If local businesses pass on higher costs to consumers, the Federation could see inflationary pressure rise in the medium term. I actually even dare say in the short term, because we've seen how that whenever we see this sort of inflationary pressure in the global markets, they tend to be almost passed on immediately, right? Just because of commodity pricing in some cases. Think about like oil. And then if we were to consider that if the U.S. were to flood the Caribbean markets with surplus agricultural products due to lost exports to Mexico, Canada, China, food price inflation might remain stable or even decline. So you have both sides of the coin, right? Where inflation could either go up or down depending on really what tends to happen.
In a significant step toward regional stability, energy ministers from across the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, OECS, convened for their third council meeting on February 4th and 5th in St. Kitts and Nevis. A key highlight of the gathering was a tour of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank's ECCB award-winning solar canopy project, which gave ministers a first-hand look at a successful renewable energy implementation. The ministers reviewed ambitious targets, notably aiming for achieving 30% renewable energy penetration across the OECS by 2030, as stated during the meeting. Valda Henry, Deputy Governor of the ECCB, emphasized the situation's urgency.
It is indeed an opportune time that you're meeting as energy ministers and the technical teams under the theme Sustainable Energy, creating opportunities for reinventing the economy of the OECS. We know that our economies are in fact in dire need of transformation so that we can advance the good of the people of the region.
The ECCB Solar Canopy Project received the 2022 Central Bank Greening Award and was an exemplary model for the visiting officials. Wayne Myers, project specialist at the ECCB's Support Services Management Department, detailed the phased approach of the Green of Campus project.
The Green of the Campus project, we have broken into 3 phases. We have first phase is the generation of electricity from a renewable source. Second is reduction in consumption by investing in energy-efficient products.
He highlighted the comprehensive retrofitting of the bank's infrastructure, including replacing compact fluorescent lamps, CFL lights, with LEDs and upgrading air conditioning systems to more efficient models. Myers noted the project included installing solar canopies, running the system for a year to collect data, and then adding battery storage to optimize energy usage. The Honorable Benarva Brown, Energy Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, expressed her satisfaction with the project.
I'm happy to see this level of development within our region, and the bank that decided that they wanted to become carbon neutral and them taking the steps to implement this project. St. Vincent and the Grenadines were committed to transitioning towards renewable energies. We are volcanic island, and we have done investigations into the possibility of geothermal. We have also invested into solar infrastructure, and we hope to expand the level of infrastructure in terms of solar and the penetration of solar PV within St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We also have hydroelectricity, and that
she outlined St. Vincent and the Grenadines' commitment to renewable energy, mentioning investigations into geothermal potential, investment in solar infrastructure, and the existing contribution of hydroelectricity, which
contributes significantly to our renewable energy. Hydro contributes about 15% towards our energy mix.
This regional perspective underscores a unified effort toward diversified energy sources. The Honorable Veronica Dorset, Hector Infrastructure Minister of Montserrat, lauded the ECCB's leadership.
I want to applaud the ECCB for taking this step and leading the way, showing the governments what we can do with the available spaces.
She highlighted the potential for Montserrat, which is currently planning its town to integrate similar solutions in public spaces like car parks, addressing Montserrat's energy challenges.
We are exploring our geothermal potential in order to supply the people of Montserrat with electricity. The energy bill is enormous, and the quality of life of our people is important to us.
The OECS-wide initiative signals a decisive shift towards sustainable energy solutions, intending to boost economic resilience and environmental stewardship. Alistair Brooks, lead advisor at the Facility for Renewable Energy with New Zealand in the Caribbean, said,
"They've done a fantastic job. It's well engineered, well constructed. It obviously makes sense financially for the bank. And I think they should be proud of what they've achieved, and it's a good example for what can be done for the other nations. Really, it's about trying to manage the cost of power over the long term. Each project will gradually provide a bit more stability in power prices, and if you were running a commercial business, then you can obviously offset your cost of power. The hard part is that impacts your electricity utility, which is also an essential part of your economy. So there's a balance and a trade-off to be found there, and that's taking time, but I think it's coming together. The utilities will need to have a new business model, and I think with a bit of time and support, that'll come.
According to Chamberlain Emmanuel, Organization of the Eastern Caribbean States representative,
ministers have agreed is the OECS Sustainable Energy Green Print, which would be a roadmap for the next decade, 2035, and within that roadmap, a modest regional target of 30% penetration of renewable energy, including solar.
The meeting themed Sustainable Energy, Creating Opportunities for Reinventing the Economy of the OECS focused on charting a course for economic transformation through sustainable energy initiatives over the next decade. In regional news, Transparency International highlights corruption in Guyana. Guyana News Source reports.
Transparency International is out with its latest international report on public corruption. The report has found that in Guyana, state capture by economic and political elites fosters misappropriation of resources, illicit enrichment, and environmental crime. According to the report, although Guyana has created anti-corruption institutions and laws, transparency and law enforcement are very low, and attacks on dissenting voices, activists, and journalists are increasingly common. Guyana scored 39 out of 100 on the corruption index. According to Transparency International, on its scorecard, a score of 100 is seen as clean, while a score of 0 is seen as highly corrupt. The government has been coming under increased criticism and scrutiny over reports of corruption within public institutions and government offices. The government has also faced criticism over attacks targeting government critics and those who highlight cases and allegations of corruption in the government. Some activists have accused the government of filing trumped-up cybercrime charges against them in an effort to silence their criticism. Back in December, the government hosted an anti-corruption expo. And at that event, the Minister of Governance, Gail Teixeira, acknowledged the reports of corruption within the government. She said as Guyana goes forward in the anti-corruption fight and gets better and stronger in investigating corruption, there needs to be focus on building resilient institutions against corruption. Teixeira also said there are a number of institutions involved in the fight against corruption, and with more resources being provided to them, more is expected from them. But even with that assurance, the People's Progressive Party Civic Administration continues to be dogged with allegations of widespread corruption within the government, especially as it relates to the award of contracts and the procurement of goods and services. Just last week, the CEO of the Central Housing and Planning Authority, Sherwin Greaves, resigned from office amid questions surrounding his purchase of high-priced properties in the U.S. and the sale of prime lands in Guyana to companies associated with his real estate agents in the U.S. Mr. Greaves has denied any wrongdoing. Last week, an embattled Assistant Commissioner of Police, Calvin Brutus, was fired from his job after a tribunal set up by the Police Service Commission cited him for alleged acts of corruption in the procurement of millions of dollars in goods for the police force. While he has denied those claims and the legitimacy of that tribunal, he continues to face more than 250 criminal charges in the courts for a number of alleged financial crimes related to his work in the Guyana Police Force. In June 2024, the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Labor, May Thomas, was sanctioned by the U.S. government for her alleged acts of corruption that were linked to two prominent businessmen and their businesses, which were also sanctioned by the U.S. Thomas was sent on administrative leave and continues to receive a full salary. The government of Guyana has been seeking information from the U.S. on those sanctions. There continues to be concerns about widespread corruption in the award of multi-million-dollar government contracts covering a number of sectors, from agriculture to infrastructure development to housing development. The opposition has continuously accused the government of doling out billions of dollars in contracts to its friends, families, and favorites. The Vice President, Barra Jagdeo, has stated that the systems to guard against corruption in Guyana are working.
Jamaica slips in global corruption ranking amid rising concerns.
Despite being a leading Caribbean nation, Jamaica appears to be trailing behind its regional counterparts in the fight against corruption. This, according to the Transparency International's 2024 Corruption Perceptions Index CPI, Sandy Williams reports.
The 2024 Corruption Perceptions Index, CPI, ranks 180 countries worldwide, including 11 English-speaking Caribbean states, shedding light on where nations stand in terms of integrity and governance. Jamaica now sits at 73rd place globally, slipping from 69th in 2023. While the country's CPI score remains 44 out of 100, its position relative to other nations has declined.
For the 5th year in a row, we continue to be in the very same position. What that means is that we're not doing anything to move the score.
This stagnation underscores the persistent corruption challenges Jamaica faces, especially as 120 of the 180 ranked countries scored 50 or below, indicating a widespread corruption crisis.
The vast majority of the world's peoples continue to suffer from inadequate education, health, inadequate infrastructure, arising from the diversion of public funds to the pockets of the wealthy, and from the fact that governments continue to serve the minority interests of the very wealthy few rather than of the majority.
A major focus of the 2024 CPI report is the alarming rise of climate corruption, where environmental policies and resources are manipulated for personal or political gain. This adds another layer of urgency to tackling corruption, particularly in vulnerable regions like the Caribbean. For National Integrity Action NIA, Jamaica's standing reflects a bleak corruption landscape, demanding immediate and bold reforms.
CPI 2024 issues a call to action. A call to action, advocates around the world, not only to combat corruption generally, but to combat climate corruption, specifically which left unchecked, literally aggravates the climate crisis and the effects of that crisis, and therefore poses an existential threat, particularly to peoples in small island developing states.
The organization is calling for stronger legal safeguards to prevent the wealthy elite from capturing state power and regulatory bodies.
So my call to action this morning is simple. Will you support the anti-bribery campaign? Where will our politicians stand on this iota, this small aspect of changing our culture? Where do you stand on it? Where does your company stand on it? What will your activity be? Because the perception of corruption is not just an institutional perception. It's a perception that touches and concerns all Jamaicans.
Among the 11 English-speaking Caribbean nations in the CPI rankings, Barbados leads the way with an impressive 23rd place ranking, making it the least corrupt country in the region. Close behind are the Bahamas, St. Vincent, Dominica, St. Lucia, and Grenada, all performing significantly better than Jamaica. Meanwhile, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, and Guyana remain stuck with consistently poor sub-50 scores, signaling long-standing struggles with corruption perception. Sandy Williams, TVJ News.
We now bring you these international reports.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has been confirmed as Secretary of Health and Human Services. The 71-year-old secured the nomination by a Senate vote of 52 to 48. The confirmation paves the way for him to be sworn into the top health job, overseeing multiple high-profile agencies. And this is the moment the confirmation was announced in the Senate.
The yeas are 52, the nays are 48. The confirmation is confirmed.
Let's go to our North America correspondent, Anthony Zerker, who's been following developments for us. Anthony, hello to you. A close-ish result, 52 for, 48 against. Does that reflect a lot of the controversy there's been around RFK and what he said in the past about vaccines?
Well, I think it reflects the divisions in the U.S. Senate. There are 53 Republicans. Only one Republican broke ranks and voted with all the Democrats, the 48 Democrats in the U.S. Senate. That was Mitch McConnell, the senator from Kentucky, formerly a Republican leader in the U.S. Senate. He said that Kennedy had a record of trafficking in dangerous conspiracy conspiracy theories and eroding trust in public health institutions. But this is another sign that Republicans, by and large, are sticking together to support Donald Trump's nominees to cabinet positions, despite concerns about some of them, including RFK Jr., no matter how controversial they may be.
Yeah, although earlier, I think, Anthony, it's fair to say that Republican politicians, alongside Democrats, as well as the health and scientific community, had expressed concerns about his potential appointment. So what does this actually mean now that he has been confirmed? What does it mean for the health department? What does it mean for the health services that the average American might receive?
Well, something to keep in mind is that the Department of Health and Human Services, which Kennedy is going to lead, has been targeted for massive cuts by the Trump White House and Elon Musk and his Doge team. So Kennedy is going to be taking over an embattled department that has, as you mentioned, a wide range of responsibilities, including medical research, including food and drug regulation, and including managing health insurance, government-run health insurance programs for the elderly and the low-income Americans. So it's going to be a trying time there. There have already been massive resignations from some of the research centers, the Centers for Disease Research, for instance, and that is going to be something that RFK Jr. is going to have to deal with. He has said his priorities are going to be addressing what he says is too much processed foods in American diet, removing food additives and chemicals that he says are dangerous to Americans, and making America healthy again is his main catchphrase.
And Anthony, Kash Patel is the man that President Trump wants to be the next director of the FBI. He's going through the confirmation process, not at the stage that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is at. Bring us up to date with what's been happening on that.
He was approved by the Senate Judiciary Committee by a vote of 12-10. And once again, this was a straight party line vote. All 12 Republicans supported him. All 10 Democrats opposed. Yet another piece of evidence that Republicans are sticking together to support Donald Trump's nominees, even though Kash Patel is a very unconventional, to say the least, pick to head the FBI. He has been very critical of the FBI in the past, says that it's politicized. It's promised to root out individuals working in the department who he says are insufficiently loyal or are unqualified for their jobs. Republicans seem to have shelved those concerns, put them aside, and said that someone like Kash Patel would be a breath of fresh air to bring in to root out the corruption in the department.
An Israeli hostage freed from Hamas captivity was released from hospital on Thursday and greeted by a cheering crowd as he returned home. Ohad Ben Ami was returned to Israel last Saturday as part of a Gaza ceasefire between Israel and the Palestinian militant group aimed at ending 15 months of war.
This is a very emotional day and happy because Ohad is back home, but we need not to forget there are so many people still not home, and we need to support them, to do everything we can do to support our government to take this next step to fulfill the deal.
That deal appeared near to unraveling this week amid accusations of violations on both sides. Hamas on Thursday said it did not want the agreement to collapse, but it said it rejected what it called the, quote, language of threats and intimidation from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and U.S. President Donald Trump. The Israeli and American warnings came after Hamas accused Israel of holding up an expected influx of aid deliveries and said it would not hand over 3 more hostages on Saturday until the issue was resolved. That prompted Netanyahu and Trump to warn the ceasefire should be canceled if the hostages were not freed. In a statement, Hamas said it, quote, reaffirms its commitment to implementing the agreement as signed, including the exchange of prisoners according to the specified timeline. The war in Gaza erupted after a Hamas-led attack on Israel on October 7, 2023, that killed at least 1,200 people according to Israeli tallies and saw more than 250 taken as hostages. That triggered a relentless Israeli response that has laid waste to the coastal enclave and killed more than 48,000 Palestinians, according to Gaza health officials. Under the current ceasefire, Hamas has so far released 16 Israeli hostages out of 33 captives to be exchanged for hundreds of Palestinian prisoners held by Israel in the first stage of a multi-phase deal. Continuing talks in Cairo have focused on issues such as Israel's allowing the entry of mobile homes, tents, medical supplies, and fuel. Hamas said heavy machinery was needed for the removal of rubble. International aid officials confirmed that aid was coming in despite considerable logistical problems, though they cautioned that far more was needed. The threat to cancel the 42-day ceasefire that formed the basis of the agreement has drawn thousands of Israeli protesters onto the streets this week, calling on the government to stick with the deal in order to bring the remaining hostages home.
Protesters gathered outside London's High Court on Thursday said Shell should take responsibility for environmental pollution in Nigeria, as a pivotal hearing in lawsuits brought against the British oil major began. Thousands are suing Shell and its Nigerian subsidiary SPDC over oil spills in the Niger Delta, a region blighted by pollution, conflict and corruption related to the oil and gas industry. Godwin Bebe Okpabi, leader of the Ogale community in the Niger Delta, spoke outside the court.
Shell, Royal Dutch Shell, have polluted our land, destroyed our way of life, and the two basic rights that we are supposed to have, rights to live, and then rights to a clean environment, they are saying we don't have it. And that's why we're here in the courts.
In Nigeria, hundreds of indigents barricaded a Shell manifold where a recent oil spill overflowed from a saver pit. Here's an Ogale community leader, Kagima Igwe Benjamin.
Our crops is not coming out. We don't have drinking water mostly. The underground water is seriously affected. Even when you dug the borehole now, you can't get the good water to drink in the whole of Ogale.
Decades of oil spills caused widespread environmental damage, destroying the livelihood of millions of communities near the Niger Delta and impacted their health. Shell, however, says the vast majority of spills were caused by illegal third-party interference, such as pipeline sabotage and theft. Shell's lawyers said in court filings that SPDC recognises it is obliged to compensate those harmed, even if it is not at fault. But Okpabi said Shell had made billions of dollars in Nigeria and had a moral responsibility to prevent and remediate oil spills.
That money is blood money.
Parts of the case began nearly a decade ago. In 2021, the UK's Supreme Court ruled that the case should be heard in the English courts. The lawsuit is the latest example of multinationals being sued in London for the acts of overseas subsidiaries.
Now on the US, rising prices are affecting consumers who are far from ecstatic. The egg prices have soared 15% in the latest US inflation report. The spike in egg prices comes as bird flu sweeps across the nation, killing millions of chickens and decreasing egg production. Our North America business correspondent Ritika Gupta went to her own local supermarket in New York City to check this far from paltry increase in prices.
Across the US, empty shelves, shortages and steep price tags greet shoppers searching for eggs in supermarkets.
It's ridiculous. It is. I mean, you know what is that? $10 for a dozen eggs?
The eggs I usually buy, they used to be around like 7 something, now they're around like 10.
Egg prices have broken record after record as bird flu spreads across the country, killing millions of chickens. Average wholesale prices for large white eggs reached $8 a dozen, according to price tracking firm Expana. In this New York City food store, they say they have no other choice but to pass the higher costs onto the consumer.
The cost of eggs has gone up a lot, so we've had to increase our prices significantly too. Without that, we wouldn't be able to get through this.
This is my local market in New York City, and as you can see, there's no shortage of eggs. But if you look at the prices, I mean, they are eye-watering. So take a look at this, nearly $12 for a dozen eggs. Here, $16 and almost $18 for 12 eggs. That is double what it was previously. And that's hitting American wallets. Many consumers paying their grocery bills still feel the pain from a pandemic run-up in prices. Inflation rose to 3% in January, worse than expected, as egg prices soared 15%.
It's in a one-way street.
The egg price explosion poses a political problem for US President Donald Trump. He won the White House in November by hammering the Biden administration over high food and other costs. Trump also promised to bring down grocery prices on his first day in office. But the high cost of eggs looks set to stay. The United States Department of Agriculture predicts egg prices will rise another 20% this year.
You can't just raise baby birds overnight. It takes, a certain amount of time for them to get up to a certain size, a certain age to be able to lay a retail desirable egg. It does not appear that this is going away anytime soon.
While it's not any politician's fault, it's now their problem, as soaring prices and a shortage leave Americans worse off. Ritika Gupta, BBC News, New York.
You were listening to the WINN FM 98.9 newscast. Our top stories were:
Kim Collins Athletics Stadium rehabilitation project on road to completion.
OECS energy ministers tour ECCB's solar canopy project, aim for regional renewable energy transformation. Transparency International highlights corruption in Guyana. Jamaica slips in global corruption ranking amid rising concerns. Internationally, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. confirmed as U.S. President Trump's health secretary by Senate. Thank you for listening.